Yo, parish orphans and retrogrades. On today's episode of Rules for Retrogrades, I bring to you a special episode involved in the news. It's a current event. The Shroud of Turin is back in the news, and it is being vindicated. It's been vindicated scientifically. And my claim to you today is a big claim that the reportage of the vindication of the Shroud of Turin is far, far underreported. It's diminished. There's a mitigated version of the extent to which the Shroud of Turin has been vindicated in recent years. Now, I've wanted to do this show for a while. Even secular outlets are doing stories entitled, "Is this proof the Turin Shroud is real?" Scientists, with a question mark, scientists make startling discovery after analyzing cloth Jesus was buried in. And the fact of the case is that there's a very, very slight addition to the very, very compelling evidence that is gathered since the year 2000, which overturns the 1988 overturning of the veracity of the cloth. I remember being 7 years old in 1988, and my teacher saying, "Oh, it's a fake." Everyone was upset. There was radiocarbon dating in 1988, and it's quite the scandal. It looks rather like foul play in retrospect. There's almost no way to avoid saying it was foul play. They purposely took, we'll get to it all, a patch of the shroud that had been repaired in the 1400s, and they tested it. There's just one little piece of it. They divided it into three, and they made it look like they took it from three separate parts of the cloth. They're supposed to take it from seven. And they said, "Oh, look, it's the 1400s. It's a fake. Christians are fake. It's a fugazi." So that's been the story from 1988 to 2000. They started reimagining it in 2000. And over the next 17 years or so, the shroud was vindicated so much. And then there's been one little addition to the vindication of the shroud. World media is reporting only that one little vindication, but they left all of the previous vindications that accumulated over the previous 17 years, specifically 2000 to 2017, in the wake. And so really what's being reported as, oh, maybe the shroud isn't a fake, is also part of a kind of conspiracy of silence against the shroud, because there is no way anyone can look at all of the scientific data. I'm going to present it all today. It's really Father Robert Spitzer's accumulation of all the data from 2000 to about 2017, and I'm going to make his presentation more or less today. He gave one at the 2017 Napa Valley Conference. I've asked him to come on the show. He's a Jesuit. I mean, he's a very good guy, I think. I really have always liked Spitzer. He's a Jesuit. I think the answer was, I asked through a Jesuit friend of mine. I went to the Greg. They said, "Well, you're not big in the Jesuit order." But so this is really his presentation that proves that this little scant bit of, it's fine, it's good, bit of vindicatory evidence that came out yesterday and the day before is absolutely mitigated, partialized version of the truth. So I'm on Daily Mail. They're still framing it like, oh, maybe the shroud could be real after all, by just reporting 1% of the case, of the overturn. But even they are admitting, okay, yeah, this thing is 2,000 years old. That's the most they've been willing to report. Okay, it's 2,000 years old. There's so much more slam dunk evidence that it was Jesus because of his unique crucifixion, the blood type. I'm going to go through it all. And it's really just Father Robert Spitzer's evidence. I'll share with you the video that I got all of it from. I have it practically memorized. I used to show my students. I've asked him to come on and present it himself. Like I said, I just want to let you know. But this is the first line of the Daily Mail article. A controversial linen shroud, regarded by some to be the one Jesus was buried in, basically the only possible conclusion, has baffled the world for more than 13 centuries. When it was first exhibited in the 1350s, the Shroud of Turin was touted as the actual burial shroud used to wrap the mutilated body of Christ after the crucifixion. But research in the 1980s, specifically 1988, I'm going to talk a little bit about this intentionally corrupted provenance, as far as I can tell, appeared to debunk the idea it was real after dating it to the Middle Ages, hundreds of years after Christ's death. Now, this is an article from yesterday, Italian researchers who used a new technique involving X-rays to date the material have confirmed it was manufactured around the time of Jesus about 2,000 years ago. It's good stuff. They say the fact the timelines add up lends credence to the idea that the faint, blood-stained pattern of a man with arms folded in front were left behind by Jesus' dead body. The Bible states that Joseph of Arimathea wrapped the body of Jesus in a linen shroud and placed it inside the tomb. It's consistent with Matthew chapter 27, verses 59 to 60. Then Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a new linen cloth. He put Jesus' body in a new tomb that he had dug in a wall of rock. Then he closed the tomb by rolling a very large stone to cover the entrance. After he did this, he went away. Unquote. The burial cloth has captivated the imagination of historians, church chiefs, skeptics, and Catholics since it was first presented to the public in the 1350s. French knight Geoffroy de Charnay gave it to the dean of the church in Lirey, France, proclaiming it the Holy Shroud. The cloth appears to show faint brownish images of the front and back, depicting a gaunt man with sunken eyes who was about anywhere from 5'7" to 6 feet tall. I heard my friend Michael Knowles say this yesterday, that he must have been reading from a similar article like this too. 5'7" to 6 feet. We used to say it's about a 5'9" Jesus. Markings on the body also correspond with the crucifixion wounds of Jesus mentioned in the Bible, including thorn marks on the head. Now, they're very unspecific here. It's 124 very specific blood wounds that correspond, that match up with another separate relic. As far as we know, the two relics' provenances have never overlapped. And yet the 124 blood stains between the shroud and what's called the sudarium, or the headcloth of Oviedo, same thing, they match up exactly. In other words, the sudarium, I'll explain what it is later, a face cloth used for corpses to carry them from crucifixions, had to be overlain on the thing, and you just got blood seeping through. 124 unique wounds, from the thorn marks on the head, the laceration on the neck, bruises on the shoulders. Historians have suggested the cross he carried on his shoulder weighed about 300 pounds, which would have left contusions. The Bible states Jesus was whipped by Romans, aligning with the lacerations on the back, who also placed a crown of thorns on his head before crucifixion. I'm going to tell you, so they are getting through the kind of overturn of the overturn in 1988, but they're just not being that specific, these secular news sources. And I heard my friend Michael Knowles talk about it in a show yesterday. I heard Steve Turley talk about it. Both of them are believing Christians. And so they were just running through it, the news as much as they can as these good believing Christians. Knowles is a Catholic, trying to present the evidence that they'd heard, and they're presenting it as news. And I'm just sitting there listening to it like, oh, okay, you got to tell about this specific science. You are going to be shocked when I get through. If you haven't seen Father Spitzer's 2017 Napa Valley presentation, it's excellent. I've re-listened to it several times. I listen to it about twice a year. I did it once on 2 times speed, and I just ripped all of the science. So it's all Father Spitzer's accumulation of the fact. Once again, this article does cover that in 1988, a team of international researchers, I think it's a very corrupt team of international researchers, analyzed a small piece of the shroud using carbon dating and determined the cloth seemed to have been manufactured sometime between 1260 and 1390 AD. This technique used the decay of a radioactive isotope of carbon to measure the time and date objects containing carbon-bearing materials. Some experts have said that the linen's authenticity should no longer be disputed claiming it was made from flax grown in the Middle East and features a helmet-style crown of thorns on the man's face. The artistic rendering of the tiara-like crown of thorns is wrong. He had a whole helmet fashioned for him. See, I wanted to get here because the 1988 researchers basically had to have had a kind of culpable mens rea. I'll present the evidence for that. It had to be a kind of conspiracy to make the shroud look fake when it was authentic, which is, what you expect, given who runs the world. But this article doesn't cover how guilty they look. I will cover it when I start going through Spitzer's evidence. However, others have held on to the notion that it is fake due to the 1988 radiocarbon dating analysis conducted at 3 different laboratories, which all determined it was 7 centuries old. For the new study, and now hold on to that thought, the three separate laboratories, doesn't that vindicate it? No, I'll explain exactly why not later, and why this Daily News article is essentially in league to diminish the profound effect to which the shroud has been vindicated. Remember those 3 separate laboratories? They're making it sound really objective. Not so. It will knock your socks off how corrupt the evidence against the shroud is. They just say this: for the new study, scientists at Italy's Institute of Crystallography of National Research Council conducted a recent study using wide-angle X-ray scattering. The technique measures the natural aging of flax cellulose and converts it to time since manufactured. Okay, so this is the technical last little bit of evidence that vindicated the thing. I'm going to present to you now Father Robert Spitzer's accumulation of all of the vindication between like 2000 and 2017, and it just dwarfs the last little bit of vindicatory evidence that broke, earlier this week. It just dwarfs it. You'll go from being like, oh, well, that's cool, maybe the shroud's real, to it must be real, it must have been Jesus, and it's even, to borrow Father Spitzer's term, a miracle of light, whereby we have the single photographic negative of non-photosensitive material in the entire world in the shroud. It can't be anything other than a relic of the resurrection. There is evidence not only that it was Jesus was real, 2,000 years ago, was bodily Jesus, but a real relic of his actual resurrection. It is a 3D image we see in the shroud. Contusions, which are subdermal, it becomes the spiritual man hypothesis. Mechanical man becoming spiritual is what you start seeing taking place over 1/40 billionth of a second. The light radiation without heat radiation that was requisite to form this image. And you're not getting that from all the news stories. Turley did a great job. He mentioned the headcloth of Oviedo. Knowles did a little presentation that was really, really good, but he didn't mention the headcloth of Oviedo, which corresponds with the shroud, 124 head wounds. So I'm going to go through all of Spitzer's evidence. First, I want you to please consider helping me get to my goal of 100,000 subscribers on this channel. So subscribe if you're not, like this video, leave a comment, click the notification bell. If you want to support this channel, do so on Locals and Subscribestar. I got kicked off of Patreon because we always tell the truth here. Even if it means making our own people mad, making secular left mad, whatever it is. It's always about the truth. If you want to further support this channel, September 11th is an interesting start date for us. Not because of 9/11, but because we are offering a class on how patriarchy works, how marriage really works. 9 specific courses on Wednesday evenings beginning on September 11th. Because marriage prep in our time has failed, the church is essentially silencing the real lessons needed to be taught in marriage prep, the real lessons which help to bulwark the household patriarchy, because the church's leadership no longer teaches household patriarchy. They teach something called mutual submission, which is a feminist false gospel. So they won't teach these 9 lessons. We say in this new book, which is the textbook for the course, also publication date September the 11th, it's called Leave and Cleave, that here are the 9 things you need to know to have an excellent marriage. We have more divorce in the church than ever before, more annulments since the 1990s. There's a little higher level of annulments in the 90s, but still too many. than ever before in the previous 19 centuries. And that's because the church refuses to teach, whether it's in marriage prep courses or even in the homiletics on Sundays, or even to repeat the Bible. The church has literally taken to censoring passages of the Bible, which include the patriarchal advice. So take our course, buy our book. They're now on pre-sale. They'll both be published. First class, September 11th. The book should be ready for September 11th. We've been writing all summer, latter half of the summer, I should say. And you can buy those on timothyjgordon.com today. Pre-order the book. You get a signed copy if you pre-order it. We're not going to do that after it's out of pre-order. It'll arrive in first or second week of September for that first class. Also order the class today. Limited seats, 3 weeks countdown. 3 weeks from today, that class begins. We have limited seats. People have already rushed in to fill the space. Go to timothyjgordon.com, click enroll, and click purchase on the book. Also, go to realestateforlife.org to get out of your blue state and get to your red state today. That's not helping this channel out. That's helping yourself and your family out. You can't just toil in a red state, in a blue state. You got to get to a red state where you will be at least generationally a little bit safer, one generation safer. Who knows what they're going to do? What will the September, October surprise be in this general election year? You don't need to worry as much if you get out of your blue state and get to a red state today. Go to realestateforlife.org. Okay, so what I'm presenting now is basically the work of Father Robert Spitzer, who's presenting the work of these scientists. Spitzer's galaxy brain, high IQ, 150 IQ type of guy, Jesuit, has some really great books that I've had for a long time as a trained philosopher. He also is no slouch in the science. He's a PhD, and he took on the Shroud of Turin kind of as a pet thing. He works with these doctors, Dr. Raymond Rogers, which is hilarious because it's Ray Rogers, Dr. Giulio Fonti. He really interfaces with them closely. And this is his presentation, Father Spitzer's, where he gathered all of the scientific evidence. It is unfathomably convincing, especially compared to what's even being reported this week in terms of the vindicating powers of the science for the Shroud. This is Father Spitzer's presentation from 2017 Napa. So thanks, Father. If you're out there, if you hear this, I'm giving you full credit here. I am basically just repeating your PowerPoint presentation now. Real quick, the Shroud of Turin is a 14-foot linen cloth that Jesus' body was wrapped in by Joseph of Arimathea, who was a member of the Sanhedrin, one of the good guys in the Sanhedrin. Lots of even Grail mythology about Joseph of Arimathea and the Knights. There's a lot there. The Shroud itself is the most scientifically analyzed relic in the history of the world. It presents us with an anomaly, something that in several manners is unique in all of the world in terms of science or a substratum that is being studied by science, not just from a Christian point of view, from a secular, from a scientific, methodological point of view. It is utterly unique insofar as it is a 3D picture. We see subdermal contusions of Jesus, which represents a photographic negative image of a non-photographically sensitive linen cloth. It is the only, I repeat, the only photographic negative image of a non-photographically sensitive linen cloth. Now, you might be saying, if you're Catholic out there, what about the tilma of Guadalupe? Well, it's not that's not technically a photographic negative image on non-photographically sensitive linen. The tilma is remarkable because the color is non-elemental. The color on that cactus cloth called tilma is not actually on the cloth, the cactus cloth. It hovers 1/8 of a millimeter above it like a hologram. They can't figure it out on the tilma. So yes, that seems similar, like a photographic negative image on non-photographically sensitive substrate, but it's not. It has the same kind of effect, because cactus cloth is non-photographically sensitive, but the image isn't actually impressed there. Here, it's only the top fibril, the very topmost layer of like a cotton textile or a linen or whatever. Only the very top has the color in it. It's impossible to do that with crayon, marker, even if you have evidence of like EMP or atomic bursts, where someone gets like blown against the wall, it goes all the way through. It would not just be on the fibril. So what you have is the light energy without the heat energy. We'll get to that at the end. But once again, it's also unique insofar as it is a three-dimensional image. We see things inside Jesus, once again, like an X-ray. It's notable that in the provenance of not only the shroud, but in the provenance of the entire iconography of Christ's face, his facial features, which, as Kanye West says, I'm not here to argue over his facial features, but they did change around 360 AD. They went from a Roman phenotypical man to a Semitic phenotypical man, and they all changed after that. And it has to do with the history of the shroud. The more important provenance for you to understand as it relates to this story is the provenance of the scientific testing of the shroud. Begin in 1978. There's a host of scientists who say this is absolutely real from a thermochemical point of view. It's Father Spitzer's work. From a physical point of view, meaning physics, what we know about Newtonian physics. From a medical point of view, coroner's reports, and from a photographic point of view, the team of 1978 scientists said this is absolutely real. And more important than that, though it's hard to believe that there could be anything more important than authenticating it, they set out protocols, very specific protocols, for an eventual radiocarbon dating of this, because the church always allows the relics to be radiocarbon dated. The protocols set out that there needed to be 7 samples taken, spaced out somewhat evenly, maybe 3 on this side, 3 on this side, and 1 in the middle, sent to 7 labs. They said, when we radiocarbon date this thing, we want 7 samples sent to 7 different labs to keep it to keep our margin of errors absolutely low, to keep it absolutely objective, send them out to non-Catholic scientists, 7 different labs, 7 different samples. Fast forward a decade, 10 years, 1988, the year of the radiocarbon dating. I was 7 years old. I think I was in Mrs. Coates' class in 2nd grade. And I remember my teacher coming in. It was either Mrs. Coates, 2nd grade, or Mrs. Black's 3rd grade. In Catholic school, saying, well, this is very disappointing. The shroud's a fake. They just radiocarbon dated it to the 1400s. And here's how objective it was. So there can't be any pushback. It was sent out to 3 separate labs. I hadn't understood then that from 1978, they said it should be 7 labs. They sent it out to 3 labs, 3 different labs. So it sounds pretty objective. It sounds pretty damning. And they all said the same thing, that this comes from the carbon dating. 3 pieces of the shroud is what they said. This is a lie. This is a lie. 3 pieces of the shroud sent to 3 different labs, and they're all from the 1460s. Late 1300s, probably 1460s. Which the church still kind of ran the world then. This is the way idiot left, IQ 95s think of world history. So this stands to kind of the IQ 95 Hollywood illiterates conception of who ran the world in 1460. What you don't know is that there's this whole other provenance of the scientific testing of the shroud. In 2000, there was a scientist named Raymond Rogers who had sticky tapes of cotton, sticky tapes of fibrils from the shroud that were immediately next to the place on the shroud, the quote-unquote 3 places on the Shroud of Turin where the 1988 carbon dating samples came from. Here's the thing. They found cotton in the fibrils. There was no cotton in Israel. That's fishy. Also, they looked back into the radiocarbon dating procedure that had been used 12 years before in 1988. And here's what they found. Yes, there were 3 separate substrates sent out to 3 separate labs. Okay, it's not 7, but it's still 3. That's pretty good, right? That's what they're saying at the time. I didn't even know it was supposed to be 7. But it wasn't 3 legitimate samples taken from 3 different spots on the shroud. Absolutely corruptly. They took the sample from one part of the shroud in 1988, cut it into thirds, and sent it to 3 labs, not 7, but 3, to make it look objective. More damning still, what they did in 1988 is they found a repaired patch on the shroud. This is what you're dealing with when you deal with secularists in the world. Liars. A repaired patch from a fire in France called the Fire of Chambray, where nuns in the 1450s or 1460s repaired that portion of the shroud because it had been singed slightly. They purposely pulled just one sample from there, cut it into thirds, sent it to 3 labs, and they say, look, it's 1460. It was a turkey shoot. It was a setup. It was a conspiracy. And now we know this. And they're still not reporting it in the secular news. The secular news you think is being magnanimous because that was Daily Mail. They're like, oh, they said maybe it's real. That's underreportage. That's like damning with faint praise, if you know that expression. And they're not telling the provenance of the corrupt haters of Christianity who set this thing up. They already knew this is the repaired part of the shroud. It's from the middle 1400s. Let's cut that into thirds as if they're from all over the shroud. Let's carbon date that. It comes back with they knew it was going to be dated to the middle 1400s because carbon dating is real. It works. And then they sold this pack of lies to the world. I'm not exaggerating to you, parish orphans and retrogrades. I always say Michael Knowles says he was an atheist by his confirmation in 8th grade. I was an atheist far before that. This is my earliest memory. This could be it. 2nd or 3rd grade, either Mrs. Coates or Mrs. Black's class. I remember how the teacher entered the room and said, well, that's it for the Shroud of Turin. And I was so crushed. I think this is the beginning of my atheism. As best as my memory suits. Oh, the church is running a scam on people? No, as Michael Knowles says, it's all real. The scammers are those who say it's not real. So this 1980, the testing in 1988 was fraudulent. They should actually look into this, like prosecution. 2000, Raymond Rogers takes his sticky tapes, shows cotton in the fibrils. This can't be the real deal. I mean, I guess maybe there was cotton in the 1400s, but there was no cotton in Israel, and yet there's dyed gum. There's a dye in there with gum dyed mordant from the 15th century that they did not have in Israel. And so there's basically proof that the fibrils were taken from different spots, from one spot on the shroud that did not correspond with what the 1978 protocols required. Hey, you're supposed to take it from 7 different places. They took it from one place, dyed with gum mordant, cotton there that wouldn't come from Israel. And so starting in 2000, Raymond Rogers' conclusion is this is different. We need to retest the shroud. We need to retest the shroud. And I think that was the time in which, 12 years after the 1988 test, he said, okay, we know this is from the Fire of Chambray. We know where they took this one sample. It's essentially corrupt. Let's redo some scientific dating tests. Starting in 2000, 4 new scientific dating tests were run. Ray Rogers ran one of these. I can't get over the name. a vanillin test, which is essentially a test which, when you're dealing with linens, involves the decompositional rate at the level of a trace element that is even supposed to be there in ancient linens. So the vanillin test shows this thing's way, 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 way older than 600 years. The vanillin test shows more like 2,000 years old. The second test was by an Italian scientist named Giulio Fanti. And it was a transformed infrared spectroscopy test. And it essentially compares not the decay rate, but what's left, comparison to other linens, other ancient linens. That's what the transformed infrared spectroscopy test is. That's number 2. It also showed, like Raymond Rogers' vanillin test, that the shroud is about 2,000 years old. We'll give you the once you compress all the data and you give us the midpoint of the predictions of the age of the shroud from all 4 of these tests, it ends up at 50 AD, give or take 200 years, with 96% certitude. The third test is also Giulio Fanti's Raman laser test. It's a spectroscopic test that is less vulnerable to carbon absorption. So it's considered a better test than Giulio Fanti, a more accurate test than Giulio Fanti's transformed infrared spectroscopy test. And I obviously don't know exactly what these tests entails. I'm giving you the rundown. The fourth test was the mechanical tension and compressibility, man. So it's a stretchability before breaking test that you can apply to any linen. And the long and the short is these 4 tests say none of them came back with the result that the shroud was only 600 years old. Now, there's so much more. All of them say about 2,000 years old, midpoint of the average of all 4 is 50 AD plus or minus 200 years. But 50 AD is, 15 years off. So that's exactly what you'd expect to see. 96% certitude. And now I'm going to turn you, as Father Robert Spitzer does in his 2017 Napa Valley presentation, to 3 external references for place and date. Okay, so this is the shroud that's about 2,000 years old. But where's it from? We want place as well as date. Well, here are 3 external references. Reference number 1, Max Fry's pollen grains sample. Max Fry is the world-leading expert on ancient pollen grains, which is actually fundamentally it's a larger area of research than you would think. I started looking at how he's the leader in the world. It's a big thing because this is huge for archaeology. Pollen grain samples is one of the most important areas in archaeology when you're looking at not just linens but also ancient texts. So it's a big field. He's like the best of the best. He's the MJ of pollen grain samples. And he says this absolutely comes from northern Judea, Jerusalem area. Very unique pollen they have there in that particular type of desert. Northern Judea, Jerusalem origin. That's the first external reference. So, okay, it's 2,000 years old and it seems to come from Jerusalem area. Remember, Jesus didn't live in Jerusalem, but he was there for the Passover, which became Christian Holy Week. And you're supposed to make the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, the holy city, as a Jew for the Passover, which he did. And he ended up being taken late on Holy Thursday, killed on Good Friday, in the grave Holy Saturday. And as we're going to find out scientifically in a few minutes, resurrected, scientifically demonstrable resurrection on Easter Sunday. Okay, now the second external reference for, I would say, place more than date, but also date on this one. This one is remarkable. By external, we mean things besides the shroud themselves, which correspond with the four newer tests after 1988 run on the shroud. They need to radiocarbon date it. You just have to have the Christian haters. I have lots of theories about this, pointing to foul play, out of the equation. You have to have good-minded secularists doing the test. Radiocarbon date it. That will happen eventually. The second external reference are the two coins on the eyes in the photo negative of the shroud. What we were told in 1988, parish orphans and retrogrades, was there are two anomalies on these coins. They're not real Roman leptons. That these are not typical Roman leptons, so they're probably numismatic fakes that you know, the Christians in the 1400s didn't really assume could be technologically verified 600 years later. And we found out, we caught you out, you Christian fakers. That's the story they were passing off starting in 1988. I remember this too. The two Roman leptons were not real. Well, it turns out the experts, the numismatic experts, coin collectors, said these are not mistakes on the coins at all. In terms of placing and dating the shroud, what these actually were a very little known special minting by none other than Pontius Pilate himself in the year 29 AD, where he added these two little features to the coin so that it would be memorable under him. The governor, Pontius Pilate, remember him? Jesus' condemnor. Special minting to 29 AD. There are only 5 known such examples of these Pilate leptons in the entire world. Oops. So, I mean, that one really got me. So the man died in Jerusalem. The coins were special minted by Pontius Pilate. We know the year 29 AD, so it had, you know, let's say it's 4 years after that. That's just unbelievable. That blew my mind the first time I heard it. And I think it will blow yours too if you haven't seen Father Spitzer's presentation, which I always urge everyone to watch. So hopefully you have seen it. I'm giving you the rub right now. So these are not mistakes on coins. They're Pontius Pilate's 29 AD special minting. The third external reference, which helps with place and date in a equally just shocking way, is the sudarium Christi, the face cloth of Christ, called the face cloth of Oviedo. It's a head cloth that they used for crucifixion victims when they took the body off of the cross and dragged it to the tomb. Remember, most of the crucified weren't often even nailed to the cross. The Jews who killed Christ had sought for extra torture and nails to be used. Normally, you would just suffocate a little more slowly without having your wrists and the top of your feet nailed to the cross. And they didn't have a helmet-style crown of thorns. Well, the sudarium Christi is also considered blood. We're going to get back to the shroud itself, but first, the third of these 3 external factors. The blood is real blood, real hemoglobin, not paint, not dye. And it's in 124 spots on the head of the shroud, and it's in 124 spots on the face cloth of Oviedo. And guess what? They match up exactly. You know how blood spatter works if you've ever watched Cold Case Files or something. All the ladies out there watch that, what I always call rape programming. I always tease Steph. Ladies always love it. So 124 blood spatters, basically, that match up exactly using this digital overlay technique, meaning even though the face cloth of Oviedo, the sudarium Christi, has never, as far as I know, been located in the same place as the Shroud of Turin, they match up exactly. Wow, okay. The only time they were matched up was when both were draped over the holy body of our Lord himself. So using the digital overlay technique, and it was Isidore of Seville, right? You read some Isidore if you read the the Summa of Thomas, or Thomas's Catena Aurea, Isidore. This comes from Isidore. Isidore of Seville brought the face cloth of Oviedo to Oviedo, Spain in the 600s. So the face cloth covered the face of the deceased. 124 bloodstains match perfectly the 124 bloodstains on the shroud. Just get GTFO. There is no way that this thing's a fake, and there's no way that it's not Jesus, and there's no way that we're not going to be presented with some supernatural evidence of the resurrection itself. So the shroud and the sudarium date to the exact same date, and they place to the exact same place. Do I need to keep going? So 4 new scientific dating tests, they all show 2,000 years old. 3 really, really, really slam dunk bits of external reference for place as well as date. Mox-Rice pollen grains, northern Judea, 2,000 years old. Roman leptons to 29 AD. Could you be any more satisfied with a place-date combo? And then the Sudarium Christi, which has, as far as we know, never been in the same place as the Shroud of Turin, and yet blood spatter evidence shows 124 digitally overlain exact same wounds. Holy cow, is there more? Yes, there's more. Let's get to, as suggested by the Sudarium Christi, the bloodstains on the shroud itself. The bloodstains on the shroud are real human blood, not dye, not paint. The blood type is AB positive, and the shocker here is we know Jesus, there's only about 3% of the population has AB positive blood. Our Lord has AB positive blood in all of the Eucharistic miracles that the church gets tested, like the one from Buenos Aires in the 1990s, or maybe it's early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, from Buenos Aires, when Bergoglio was actually bishop. There was an amazing Eucharistic miracle. It turned into heart muscle. 2,000-year-old sample, but it had just died from white blood cells. That was also, I believe, AB positive blood. Our Lord it's like the universal donor, I believe. I don't know that much about blood, but it's only a partial genetic profile, but they know enough to know this is AB positive. It's genuine hemoglobin. It's not dye. It's not paint. Also in the blood, this is fascinating, the wounds are commensurate with Jesus's very specific, very unique crucifixion. The blood is not only consistent with a crucifixion, but specific with the crown of thorns that the iconographers have always said. It's not the sort of beautiful crown of thorns, tiara style, that's just a brims the forehead all the way around. It is a helmet styled crown of thorns. We're going to talk about it more in a second. The bloodstains, which originate before the image. But there's a big gash on the shroud between the 5th and the 6th ribs from a Roman pilum. Of course, that's not corroborated by the face cloth of Oviedo. We're beyond that now. The hands and feet have the wounds exactly where they would have to be. Romans didn't typically drive nails into people's arms. You know, I think it's the Jews arranged extra torture for Jesus. You know, they were kind of working with the Romans. Remember, Pilate's reticent, hesitant. He doesn't really have any special hatred for Jesus. Well, the Jews did, as John's gospel mentions like 71 times. They did, and so they're seeking the worst kind of punishment. And the Romans are only too happy to comply. So there's this big gash, real blood there, between the 5th and the 6th rib. When Jesus, we get from the Gospels that it's blood and water. Between the 5th and the 6th rib, at the angle that the Roman pilum would have been driven, would have pierced what Father Spitzer says, the periocardial sac, which would release something that looks clear like water in addition to blood. Also, wounds on the back wrapping around to the sides are consistent with the wounds we know Jesus had from the gospel account. The Legionnaire's whip had 3 tips, and evidently that's, if you look closely at all, the 3 tips are seen anywhere where there are lashings. And again, subdermal injuries show up also. not just subcutaneous, subdermal, because it's like essentially a photo negative that is partly inside out. It's a 3D image. This is really interesting. There's evidence that the blood stains originated before the image did. How do we know this? Blood scientists have said that the serum of the blood typically starts separating from the coagulated blood, and it separates around the wound, holding all other things equal, if gravity's not a force. If you lay the body horizontal on a table, with gunshot wounds, the serum separates from the coagulated blood, but it pools around it. In the case of the man in the represented in the photonegative image on the Shroud of Turin, the blood separated downward from the coagulated blood of the wounds. That would be only suggested by vertical transfixion, because Jesus was transfixed vertically on the cross. That'd be the best explanation for that. It doesn't, the coagulated blood, it hasn't been separated from by the serum around it. It's not circumscribed by it as it normally would be. That's extremely interesting. More blood evidence. There are ferrins and other stress enzymes in the blood which show the man was being tortured in multiple ways at once. I'm not a blood scientist. I don't claim to be. But the science shows that not only was he being tortured before he went to his death, he's being tortured in multiple major organ groups of his body. His head. Evidence is ferrin groups. Being tortured being whipped that hard, that many times. Ferrins and other stress enzymes are released. It's amazing we can find all this. Science always vindicates truth. Truth can't contradict truth, people. This is what I'm always saying. From Big Bang Theory, Catholic priests, to all the many Catholics that had a role in quantum mechanics, both of which were condemned in Soviet Russia and China. You were put to death, like Borin Hessian was one example. Scientist that talked about Big Bang Theory by this Catholic priest. And Stalin called it the Christian conspirators. And then they just rewrote Big Bang in the 1970s to say, okay, we lost. Let's just make it seem like an atheist thing. What? That's creation ex nihilo. Science will always vindicate the truth. Truth will always always correspond with other forms of truth. A posteriori, a priori truth. So yeah, we have the ground to be we're not Calvinists. We have the ground to be really confident. Also genetic, in terms of saying this, the state doesn't own the son, the father does. You have Mendelian genetics. Gregor Mendel was also a Catholic priest, making another discovery that the Soviets and the Chinese during the middle 20th century would put to death their scientists for saying, Gregor Mendel, he got the correct theory of genetics. To show really the father does own, he has a kind of biological ownership over the son, not the state. These are just three examples of sort of Catholic science, quantum mechanics, even the principle. Wolfgang Smith, the idea that the Earth is in the center of the universe. Our solar system is in the center of the universe. This hasn't been rebutted in the last 12 or 13 years after it's been shown using the cosmic microwave background radiation. Science vindicates truth. Truth will not contradict truth. And look at this. As long as they don't fake it, you give all of these relics to the secular scientists, and a bunch of them actually converted to Catholicism because they did the science. They're atheists before. Those are a bunch of the other stories that are accompanying the story that came out today. But very little new stuff came out, but it's a good thing still because they're talking about it in world press. I contacted Knowles. I was like, hey man, look at Spitzer's full presentation. I'm just going to reproduce Spitzer's whole presentation, which is what today's show was. Now I want to conclude as Father Spitzer concluded in his prezo, the resurrection evidence. This is why it's as wild as everything else and a little bit more. I will repeat, this is the only photonegative of a non-photographically sensitive substrate in the entire world. The tilma is similar, but it's not, the color is non-elemental. It's not impressed onto the tilma of Guadalupe. The image is only on the upper fibril, which you couldn't do with crayons or markers. If you press this into, some sort of textile or whatever, the dye, the color, the ink, the crayon, even if it were a nuclear blast, it would go deep into the subsurface. That's not what you have here. It's only the uppermost fibril, which is remarkable. This is evidence. It's not a vapor. Nothing was vaporized like when you see, blast victims from nuclear blasts. Horrible, horrible. Being vaporized like against the wall. It goes way deep into the subsurface. There's no scorching, no vaporization, no blasting. There's I forget his first name. There's a doctor, Dr. Jackson, that Father Spitzer refers to, who says, the only explanation for a photographic negative on a non-photographically sensitive material is this qualification. It's light energy without the accompanying heat radiation. Light energy without the heat energy. It would have singed this thing to smithereens. Several billion, not million, but billion watts of energy without heat being emitted by a corpse? What's going on here? Let's examine it. There's a very lightning fast burst, a 1/40 billionth second burst. They can do all the math here. 1/40 billionth of a second burst that produced this image where it would only go that deep onto the surface. That's how they're getting rate, distance time. So in 1/40 billionth of a second, several billion watts of energy produced that image. That's by definition, the only thing that could produce that image on that just topmost layer of fibrils. The only thing that we have, the only technology we have now, they didn't have any of this in the 1400s or obviously in Jesus's day, is a directional vacuum ultraviolet radiation. And you would have to have like 14,000 excimer ARF lasers to do it. All of the lasers in the world today, more or less, to do this, and you'd have to have them all working at once. It's just mythic. That's where it exceeds the total capacity of all excimer ARF lasers we have today. And I guess that's about 14,000 according to Father Spitzer. So a short burst, a 1/40 billionth second long burst of several billion watts of energy without any heat is what is requisite to produce the image on a non-photographically sensitive substrate that Christ's face was produced. It's not ink, it's not dye. There's real blood there. But aside from the real blood, it's this blast image without vaporization or scorching. How does a corpse produce that kind of light energy, as Father Spitzer asks in the last 5 minutes of his talk? It's on YouTube. It's like a 47-minute video. The 47-minute video is entitled, so you can go watch it, but it's gonna read exactly like mine. A Remarkable Relic of the Resurrection is the title of this on YouTube. Father Robert Spitzer. It's 47 minutes. It's great. I just gave it to you, but give him the credit, not me. I took that exact thing. What we see is a three-dimensional image in the shroud, and we know this because there are subdermal contusions which can't be seen. So it is like an X-ray that's not an X-ray. The man is literally becoming spiritual. It's called the transparent man hypothesis of the shroud. Pitches the gospel narratives in what Father Spitzer calls a miracle of light. I'm just so appreciative to Spitzer, who's a very, IQ 145 kind of guy. There are good Jesuits for accumulating all this evidence. And this is in 2017. This is like 7 years ago. New stuff has come out. It's more boring new stuff compared to what we're talking about here. But, and I've sent it to several people, but the gospel narratives presented in what's a miracle of light, the science, when it's not faked by, when it's not like Zog science, when it's not being faked, when it's real and they're not doing what they did in 1988, it will always vindicate the truth. Transparent man hypothesis. The man is literally becoming spiritual in this 2000, it's 1989 years old. If it took place when Jesus was 33, a little less than 2,000 years old. We are watching 1/40 billionth of a second that when Jesus is literally going back from incarnated man to, God man, incarnated God man to spiritual God, second person of the Holy Trinity. We're watching that. The Shroud's amazing. The science proves it. You can't have photographic negative on non-photosensitive material. There's nothing else like this in the world. You can't have a 3D image from his inside, his subdermal insides being pictured. We couldn't produce this image today with all of that light energy without the accompanying heat energy. No scorching, no vaporization, no dyes. It matches up with 124 head wounds from another relic, the face cloth of Oviedo, which has never shared a provenance geographically with the Shroud. The 2 Roman leptons over the eyes, which were called fakes. In the 1400s, they didn't think we'd be able to tell. Well, those 2 little anomalies, yes, now we can tell 600 years later. Thank God for technology. We now know that was a special minting by Pontius Pilate himself. The pollen evidence. Max Fry, leading ancient pollen scientist, says this is absolutely from northern Judea, probably Jerusalem, where Jesus was during Holy Week, during the Passover that year. 4 new additional dating tests, and they all say 2,000 years old. Date it to about 50 AD, if you average the 4 new dating tests out, with a 96% certitude. 96% certitude. Plus or minus 200 years. But the average, the median time is 50 AD, exactly where you would want it to be. It's perfect. All we need is a new radiocarbon dating by a non-Zog scientist. That's all. Look, there's a group that doesn't want this thing to come out. Even as they report it in secular media, they're going to report. I don't mean Steve Turley or Michael Knowles. Michael Knowles probably added it the last second because he's always doing such good work with showing the truth of Catholicism sort of as an afterthought. It's sort of an afterthought. He's always so compelling. Steve Turley, I think, is a Protestant, as far as I know, and he did include the sudarium face cloth of Oviedo, but he didn't show that there's 124 wounds that match up exactly using this digital overlay technique. There's just no question. Now, Father Spitzer says he's 98% certain this is Jesus. I don't know. I mean, he's just trying to be humble, I think. Is only 98%? Seriously, recarbon date this thing. Let's do it. You just can't. You just have to watch these people closely. I mean, the church, we can all appreciate that they're always like, test this relic. If it's not real, we don't want it. We'll throw it out. Same thing. I have a little first order relic of St. Mark, the evangelist, kind of in the center of my home. Vatican, it's Vatican stamped. Okay, I don't want it up there in some central place in my home unless it's real. That's how it is. We're not afraid. The only thing to be afraid of is the conspiracy that took place in 1988. Corrupt Zog scientists purposely pulled from the repaired patch. They made it look like it was from 3 different places. The 1978 protocols required that it was from 7 different places sent to 7 different labs. They pulled from 1 locus on the Shroud, 1 place on the Shroud, cut it up into 3 corruptly, Zog scientists, and sent it to 3 labs to make it look, well, it's 3. It's not 7, but it's 3. That's not the exact protocols, but hey, we did 3. It wasn't really 3. You sent 1 sample to 3 places. That proves it right there. That proves it right there. The people running the tests knew where to pull the strands from. Don't pull it from the rest of the shroud. That's going to vindicate the thing. Well, now that looks like malice aforethought, as we say in murder analysis in law. That looks like malice aforethought. That looks like they knew if you actually tested the shroud from any other spot besides the repaired patch after the middle 1400s fire of Chambray. They knew it had been repaired. The nuns there at Chambray repaired it. They said, pull from there. Don't do 7 spots. Pull from the 1 spot, make it look like we pulled from 3 spots. That's at least good enough to corrupt it. And all of a sudden, as far as I remember, this is my earliest entanglement with atheism. Was in 2nd or 3rd grade when my teacher came in the class and was like, look, sorry, it's Fugazi. It's so convincing. I should do a Tilma of Guadalupe show soon too, because that thing, it's not a photographic negative, but that's even weirder, arguably. That's non-elemental color, which hovers like a hologram 1/8 of a millimeter above the substrate. This is a photographic negative of non-photographically sensitive substrate. The only such item in the world. Like the Philosopher's Stone by Nicholas Flamel. It's one of a kind. Sorry, I love throwing Potter references at y'all.
Oh, really stepped in it.
Yeah. So that's it. So thanks to Knowles for covering this, getting it out there. And he was expanding on the news from yesterday a little bit. Turley expanded a little bit more. Turley mentioned the Sudarium Christi, which is really, that digital overlay of 124 blood spatters. You're not going to be able to fake that. There's just no threat of it being a fake because it's all so real. You guys, write your bishops. Write the dicastery for relics in the Vatican. We want this thing radiocarbon dated properly. It was corrupted by Zog scientists in the 1988. More than just not sending it to 7 labs. They only sent it to 3. But this is direct evidence of foul play. We need to watch this thing closely, recarbon date it, and then make the world STFU, and then just show them all the evidence that Father Spitzer presented. Father Spitzer, if you're out there, I'd have loved to have just sat here and nodded as you present the evidence. It's 7 years old. You could have woven in, no pun intended, given the textile nature of this thing, you could have woven in the news of the last 7 years, including the last 7 days, to this. I'm sure there's more. I've always struggled to keep up with that exact presentation as a high school theology teacher. I would always show the students, and they're always like, holy cow. So just all this is real? Like Knowles was saying, it's all real. It's all real. The science proves it. God bless you all. Never fear science. It just can't be Zog science. It's got to be real science. Never fear science. Truth, as the common doctor, the universal doctor, the angelic doctor Thomas Aquinas said, truth cannot contradict truth. Deus Volt.